As the conflict in the Middle East widens, we're going to spend the next half an hour looking at the most asked questions on the Iran war. With me in the studio is our chief international correspondent Lise Doucet and Parham Gubadi from BBC's Persian service. I'm also joined for the next 30 minutes by Sumi Somaskanda, who's there live at the White House. And with us also is our business editor, Simon Jack. So let's get cracking straight away. Sumi, we're going to go right back to basics because one of the most searched for questions is why is the US attacking Iran?
That's a fundamental question, isn't it, Matthew? And it's one we've heard differing answers to over the course of the last few days, both from President Trump and members of his administration. Look, President Trump has laid out a few answers. He has said it was to intend that Iran could not develop its ballistic missile program further to destroy its ballistic missiles and the launchers that launch those missiles. Also to ensure that Iran could not get closer to developing a nuclear weapon. We've heard the president say that in part it was to ensure that Iran could not attack U.S. interests and assets in the region. And we heard the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, say just yesterday on Capitol Hill that one of the reasons that the U.S. attacked at this time was because they understood that if Israel attacked Iran, and Israel was going to attack Iran, that Iran would retaliate against U.S. targets in the region. Now, all of these answers, of course, that we've heard from the administration have not necessarily have not answered the questions that many members of Congress have, who say, was there a legitimate threat that was immediate on the United States? To that question, we haven't heard a definitive answer yet, but those are the reasons that the administration have given for why the U.S. is attacking Iran.
Sumi, I'll come back to the objectives a little later in this half hour, but at least let me bring you in because answer another basic question. Why is Israel involved in this?
Israel would have to be involved in this. Let us say, why is Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu's Israel involved in this? Since he was a young diplomat, he has always made the battle against Iran and its nuclear weapons the main mission of his life. Ever since October the 7th, 2023, where those attacks by Hamas on southern Israel triggered what turned into a brutal Gaza war, every time he went to see either first President Biden or then President Trump, he made it clear that the root cause of all of the problems in the region was Iran. It was fueling the fires, literally in its circle of fire, its axis of resistance, which of course was degraded in some places destroyed during the years since October the 7th. So finally, Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel keeps saying that President Trump is the greatest president in history because finally he has found someone to make common cause, and that is to go after Iran, to go after its leadership struggle, to go after what he sees as the main threat in the region.
We've seen strikes on Iran. We've seen strikes in Beirut, in Lebanon. In the last 10 minutes or so, Benjamin Netanyahu vowing to strike Hezbollah with even greater force. So explain why Lebanon is involved also.
In the run-up to what many expected would eventually be a war, Hezbollah had said they would only attack if it join the attacks to support Iran, if it became existential and if they killed the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. And for Hezbollah, which of all of the proxies and partners of Iran, Hezbollah is the strongest. It was created in the early 1980s after the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. Shia clerics from Iran, Shia clerics from Lebanon coming together to form Hezbollah, the party of God. The linkages are political security, but they're also spiritual. They would have felt obliged, you can do, Parham, that they had to be not just do something, but be seen to be doing something, even though they knew the consequences. How long they will continue, given what Israel is now doing, but that is why they are involved. They are standing, to use the expression, shoulder to shoulder with Iran on this.
Even given the weakened state they are after the war of last year. Parham, let me ask you a question, and it's difficult to get actual information from Iran, but what do we think is happening in Iran across the country?
So the most important and the latest development is that Israel is targeting Iran's headquarters, military headquarters, like Basij headquarters, which is the paramilitia. Usually they are really involved in the crackdown of the protests. Also, IRGC Revolutionary Guards headquarters, different buildings that they have. But the latest development is that Israel has announced that they targeted the political headquarters in Tehran, which is the presidential palace, and the building right next to it, a few meters from that, which is the Supreme National Security Council, and also the Assembly of Experts building. Not only these three are very close to one another. The three have been targeted. Apart from that, the Secretariat of of Assembly of Experts in Qom was also targeted. And why is it important? Because this is the body that chooses the next Iranian supreme leader. Both places, buildings were targeted. Had they convened when this took place? We don't know that yet. But they have 88 experts, religious experts, who choose the next Iranian supreme leader.
I'll come back to that choice a bit later. But as we're talking now, who is running Iran?
So they have chosen, of course, for the domestic issues, we've got the president, Masoud Pezeshkian, is running the country. But after Ayatollah Khamenei's death, they formed a three-member body that is called the Temporary Leadership Council, which consists of Iranian president, head of Iranian judiciary, Ejei, and also an Ayatollah that is unknown to many Iranians. Most Iranians do not know his name, is Arafi, Alireza Arafi, but unknown to many Iranians and foreigners.
Let me bring Simon Jack in to talk about some of the economic consequences of what we've seen over the last 3 or 4 days. Simon, let's start by looking at what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz. Take us through it.
Well, the Strait of Hormuz is a very narrow bit of the Gulf around there, about 20-odd miles between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And through that channel, about 20% of the world's energy normally goes through in tankers. And very little is happening right now. The IRGC have said they will set fire to any vessels attempting it. So it is effectively closed. And we have seen that have a knock-on effect on very sharp increases in the price of oil and in the price of gas in the form of liquid natural gas, because Qatar is the world's biggest producer of natural gas, and the world's biggest single liquid natural gas terminal in Qatar has been closed after being targeted by attacks from Iran. There's also been attacks on Saudi Arabia's biggest oil refinery. So we've seen very sharp moves, about 16-17% in the price of oil since before hostilities began this time around, but a near doubling of the price of gas on the short-dated contracts if you wanted to buy it for next month. And that is having a very big knock-on effect, because you've got to remember, Matthew, that the price of energy is incredibly pervasive. It gets into petrol at the pumps, it gets into things like transport, which can bring goods and services to your door. It also gets in the form of gas. It is made into fertilizer. Gas is involved in the production of fertilizer, so it gets into food prices. So all of this and the world is reeling a bit from what looks like an inflationary shock. And you're seeing financial markets, stock markets around the world also fall.
So how long will it take to translate so that we see petrol prices rise at the pump? And for the UK, just take us through where it gets the majority of its oil and gas.
So we get most of our oil and gas actually from Norway and the United States. Domestic oil production has fallen very sharply over the last couple of decades. So most of it comes in, about a third comes from domestic production on oil. The rest comes from Norway and the US. Half of all the UK's gas comes from Norway. But in a way, it doesn't matter where it comes from, because the prices are set internationally, because there is a massive scrum, a massive bidding war for the gas resources that are out there. So even if you're getting your gas from Norway, it doesn't mean it won't be unaffected by what's going on. So in terms of how long it will take, it typically takes about 2 weeks for a move in the oil price to be reflected on the petrol forecourt. So at the moment, £1.32 roughly for a litre of unleaded. That was on last week's prices. Currently, we're looking about £1.40. It's come in a week or two, and if prices go up to $90 a barrel, we're currently at 80. You could see it go to 140 and above. So as I say, they always tend to go up faster than they come down, to many motorists' chagrin. But basically, we're looking at a week or two before these events begin to show up in the forecourt.
Now, the question, how long will this Iran war last, is being searched an awful lot. Sumi, before I come back to you to answer that question or give us the latest thoughts, I suppose the strategic objectives are so crucial. I just want to play, and you touched upon it in your first answer, the varying answers being given from the administration over these last 3 or 4 days. And it started, of course, the first time Donald Trump spoke. And in that address, he spoke about the possibility of regime change. Have a listen to this.
When we are finished, take over your government. It will be yours to take. This will be probably your only chance for generations.
The president just wants to make it clear to the Iranians and to the world that he is not going to rest until he accomplishes that all-important objective of ensuring that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon, not just for the next few years, not just because we obliterated Fordow or some other enrichment facility, but because the Iranians themselves commit long-term to not building a nuclear weapon.
An Iranian regime armed with long-range missiles and nuclear weapons would be an intolerable threat to the Middle East, but also to the American people. Our country itself would be under threat, and it was very nearly under threat.
The president made the very wise decision. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed. And then we would all be here answering questions about why we knew that and didn't act.
So, Sumi, let me bring you back in. So the explanations have really bounced around, and I suppose that makes answering that question that was posed so difficult, because the war lasts as long as securing the objectives. But what is the objective?
Indeed, that is precisely the question that's being asked here, Matthew, specifically from critics of President Trump. You know, we've heard President Trump say that the war could last from 4 to 5 weeks. But of course, this is a president who has in the past set a time frame and blown through it, or even ignored a time frame. So it's hard to say whether that 4 to 5 weeks can be taken really as a real time frame for which this war would last. But we heard the defense secretary there, Pete Hegseth, and also Secretary of State Rubio saying until the objectives are achieved. And I think in the coming days, we're going to see real questions asked, specifically in Congress, as we know that Congress will be briefed today on this ongoing operation, of what the objectives are and when the administration will deem that those objectives have been reached. Now, remember, they have said that the ballistic missile program and the launchers for those ballistic missiles have to be completely obliterated and in order for those objectives to be reached, so that Iran can no longer pose a threat to the U.S. and its allies and partners in the region. But as we've seen, Iran continues to strike back. We don't have a clear picture on how long Iran will be able to sustain that retaliation. And because of that, we heard the prospect of boots on the ground yesterday raised, and questions to both the defense secretary and the president. And they both didn't take it completely off the table, saying, well, everything is always on the table. But certainly, if the war continues to drag on, that is going to be an even sharper question to the president. How much more will the U.S. be involved? And will the U.S. have to commit more than it has to this point, which is a vast array of air power?
Lisa, let me bring you in, because, again, the length of this war depends also on Iran's military strategy. Take us through your thinking on what you're actually seeing, because it's been suggested that it is a very change of strategy, say, to the 12-day war, a chaos theory.
It's what we call a very asymmetric war. Iran's security clerical authorities knew they could never win up against the mightiest army in the world, backed by Israel's not just military but intelligence assets. For them, the objective is to survive, and to survive in one place, no matter what the differences are. And there are differences among within the hardline security forces, within the ruling clerics. But there's one thing they agree on, and that is the survival of the Islamic Republic of Iran. That is the main objective now. And when I was in Tehran and asked the Deputy Foreign Minister, Majid Takhravanchi, will you see, if there is a war, will you see it as existential? And he said, yes, if we see it as existential, it'll be a different war. And I said, what does you mean? He said, I don't want to get into it because it will be so dangerous. And what he didn't want to say was, yes, we are going to attack the very countries who had been working around the clock to try to avert the war. And now they have hit 9 countries. Iran is trying to increase the cost of this war so that Arab states who have the ear of President Trump say, stop it, bring this to a stop. Will President Trump listen? He seems to be listening to Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel. And as Sumi said, President Trump seems to even change day by day, from one day to the next, what he thinks this is all about. For Prime Minister Netanyahu, there is no ambiguity. This is about regime change. And this is what the kind of targeting that Parham talked about. The last thing I would say, as of yesterday, and a lot has happened in 24 hours, the White House said 49 of the most senior officials have already been killed. And President Trump has said some of them were supposed to succeed the supreme leader.
Well, Parham, let me bring you in on exactly that point, because Jonathan Karl, the journalist, was talking to Donald Trump, but exactly that point he was making, that Donald Trump said to him that they had identified the US possible candidates to take over in Iran, but many of those had been killed in the initial strikes. I mean, that is so baffling in terms of strategy, in terms of what the US was perhaps planning over the days and weeks.
Exactly.
And Parham, the fact that he knows who they are, because Iranians don't know who they are.
Were they going to adopt a Venezuelan style and find somebody in, and that would disappoint and dismay many Iranians in the opposition, because that's not what they want. They've been chanting on the streets that they are sick and tired of both the reformists and the hardliners, and they want to have a different establishment. So, but the rumors have been around not only for years, but for decades, that Ayatollah Khamenei's son, one of the four sons, Mojtaba, is going to replace him after all. Now, is he alive or dead? Mehr News Agency just said that, an hour ago, said that he's alive and safe and sound. But his wife was killed along with Ayatollah Khamenei on the first second of the war. And so will he going to take power? We don't know that. But one of the senior clerics said it a year or two ago that they already know who the next leader is. They just do not release the name because they're afraid that the Israelis would assassinate him. But if there is a person from inside the country, and it's not, because nowadays we know that Iranian protesters have been on the street, and not all of them obviously, but many of them have been calling for Reza Pahlavi, the son of the late Shah, to come back from the exile and to replace this regime. But will that be possible without boots underground? How are you going to guarantee his safety in the country?
Really briefly, in terms of protests, are there any signs over these days of any sort of protests on the street? Because now it is being seen as the sort of dissent that we've met with, working with an enemy, which of course would be a death sentence.
Exactly. So, I mean, I know that even during the 12-day war, Benjamin Netanyahu asked Iranians to take to the streets, but it did not happen. So there were protests right before that. After the deadly crackdown of the protests, university students started protesting. Then the 40th day anniversary of the deadly crackdown, because Shiites commemorate that day. So people were going to the graves and chanting death to the dictator. So the protests were continuing, but they stopped after the war started. Are they going to take to the streets again? We don't know that. But just the final point, they are saying Iranian people should take the power, but take the power from where? Because even the police stations are being bombed. So all those places of power are being bombed. How do you expect Iranians to take power, to hold power, when those places are getting bombed on a daily basis?
Straight back to Washington and the White House and Sumi. And we were talking earlier about the Trump administration. You were talking about Congress. Where is public opinion in all of this? Has any early polling been done?
It's a mixed picture, Matthew, and of course, the polling is all at a very early stages. There was one poll conducted, I believe, on Sunday, a Reuters Ipsos poll that indicated that only 1 in 4 Americans supported President Trump's operation in Iran. Of course, with the caveat that it is a very limited poll, and again, very soon after this operation began. If you look at some of the commentary that we've seen more broadly, there is a bit of a split within President Trump's MAGA base. There are those who, of course, support the president and say he is taking the necessary action that no other president did to secure the U.S. for generations, as the president himself has said. But there are others among his MAGA base who have said this is a president who ran on no more foreign wars, no more U.S. involvement in wars abroad, no more regime change. And this is not what the president planned. And I think what is going to be key for public opinion here is just how long this war lasts, just how long the U.S. is involved. If this continues to stretch on and we start to see more service members killed, of course, until now, 6 service members killed, 18 wounded, that public opinion could start to shift. But it is, at this point, very early days, Matthew, and so we're going to have to continue to monitor those early polls and see if the mood is shifting.
Yes, and of course, exactly as Simon was saying, there's the economic squeeze when all of these consequences directly affect ordinary people in America too, just like here. Simon, let me bring you back in, because a lot of searches around where is safe to travel, Turkey, Egypt, Cyprus, and when flights may resume to Dubai and to Qatar.
So on where it's safe to fly, the Foreign Office here in the UK has said most Gulf states, essential travel only. That's Bahrain, Qatar, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Lebanon, etc., saying don't travel there unless you absolutely have to. Egypt, slightly different. Bits of Egypt, OK. Check with more detail. Cyprus, the UK is saying at the moment is safe. As for when flights will resume to Dubai and Qatar, the answer is that we just do not know. At the moment, flights are not travelling from Western Europe into Dubai, Qatar, and we've got no real steer on when they will reopen. Obviously, it will completely depend on the intensity of the hostilities. And as we're hearing from Marco Rubio, the heaviest bombardment hasn't even started yet. So I wouldn't hold my breath on waiting for those air routes to reopen.
Absolutely. Lise, when it comes to any off-ramp negotiations, Donald Trump saying today it's too late for talks. The Iranians also ruling that out. Where do you think we are? Is there a lot more to go before we ever get back to talking about talks?
I think now that they're in, they're going to go all in. They're going after the ballistic missiles. They're going after the leadership structures. They're going after the bases of the Basiji, the volunteer militia, the elite Revolutionary Guard Corps. I can't imagine Prime Minister Netanyahu will want to keep President Trump to hold its nerve, even as the voices of concern rise. What we don't know is just how strongly the voices of his really crucial Arab allies like Qatar, like Saudi Arabia, are saying to him about the course of this war. They're accusing Iran of being reckless. Do they think, well, maybe we'd be better off with a different kind of leadership in Iran? But there's always a moment in war, an unpredictable moment, where you think, that's it. Yes. So the outcry is, although having said that, we waited and waited for that moment in the Gaza war, and it never came.
You're absolutely right. From the Iranian perspective, of course, one of the theories is that they looked at the 12-day war where they paused, and actually that was a strategic mistake. That was seen, they thought, in Washington as a sign of weakness, and they have ripped up that strategy and they're not going back there again. Hence, what you were saying, an entirely different strategy this time around.
Well, because President Trump was quite clear. The United States only struck 3 major nuclear sites last time, and he promptly said they were obliterated, which, of course, how do you square the circle when he's going after the nuclear program that he said was already obliterated? It was very, and right after that, you'll remember, he said to Prime Minister Netanyahu, it's over, stop. This was the president still saying, I want to be the president who's remembered as being the president of peace. Now I think he wants to be remembered not as the president, but as the commander-in-chief who shaped a new Middle East. But right now, we don't know what the shape. The Middle East right now is being upended.
Param, I was reading a piece by Frank Gardner, our security correspondent, who said this has escalated faster than most people had predicted, but he thought that the conflict still had the capacity to get a lot worse in the coming days and weeks.
That's correct, because what happens is that many people thought that this regime would crumble and collapse after the leadership is taken out, but it has not happened. So what Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said was that the military commanders and the military, they are working in a mosaic style kind of way. So some of them are not even in touch with one another. So they have received the instructions before the war began, and they're acting independently. They know where they have to target, so they're shooting missiles at different directions. And we have to remember, this is an existential threat for them. They know that if they do not resist, this can be the beginning of the end. But what happens is that if the Revolutionary Guard is going to collapse all the way and lay the arm as Donald Trump wanted them, or they're going to turn into a kind of insurgency group and start acting, and then the United States has to, send boots on the ground, and then we're going to have a another one of those long wars.
Of course, they're also battling with the use of drones in this particular war. Sumi, let me bring you back in, because the Washington Post reported that the mood in the Pentagon is intense and paranoid, worried about the fighting lasting weeks, which then puts stress on the limited air defence stockpiles, which are so vital with actually taking down so many of these drones, let alone the missiles.
Yeah, that's right. And that's something actually that the president addressed on Truth Social when he said that our stockpiles are in good shape. But he blamed the former president, Joe Biden, for giving so much of the U.S. weaponry to Ukraine, in his words, for free. But indeed, no one is at this point really sure how long this conflict will last from the U.S. perspective. And we are seeing the Pentagon say that they're continuing to surge more forces to the region, more resources to the region. How long that will be sustained is unclear, but certainly the president and the defense secretary have been clear that until those objectives are reached, they will be full out involved in this operation. And that will involve, of course, as many resources as the U.S. needs to put towards it. But of course, that will also mean that the U.S. will have to take up far more defensive positions as Iran continues to retaliate as well. So that is something that's going to be watched closely in the Pentagon.